The year is 1944. The place is a frozen, splintered forest on the Eastern Front. A German grenadier, barely 20 years old, sits shivering in a foxhole. His ration, a meager, brick-hard piece of Kommissbrot, a single square of ersatz coffee, and a sliver of processed meat. It is a meal born of desperation, fuel for a dying empire. He has been told for years that the war is a crusade against the decadent, weak and materially soft nations of the West. He believes that the American soldier, the Army, is nothing more than a pampered weakling, ready to break when faced with true hardship. Now shift your gaze. Across the Atlantic and then across the English Channel. A different soldier. An American GI. He's pulling a can from his haversack. Not just any can. It's Spam or maybe a can of beef with gravy. It's hot. It's abundant. He is one of 8 million fighting men who, on this very day, are consuming 22 million pounds of canned meat. That's enough to feed the entire modern population of New York City for a full week. Every single day. One man starves on principle, believing his enemy starves worse. The other eats a feast, unaware his staggering excess is the greatest weapon in the history of warfare. This is the untold, staggering story of World War II. It is not about a specific tank, a famous bomber, or a single battle. It is about the can. It is about logistics so immense, a supply chain so audacious, that it didn't just win the war, it broke the very psychology of the German soldier, one shocked POW confession at a time. This isn't just a story of food. It is the story of how America industrialized abundance and starved the most fanatical army in history into submission. Introduction: The myth of the Spartan army. The core of the Nazi war machine was built on a lie: the superiority of the lean, hungry, Spartan German soldier. From the earliest days of the Wehrmacht, the emphasis was on discipline, efficiency, and making the most of limited resources. Their logistical philosophy was one of minimalism. Their rations, the famed Eisern ration or iron ration, were simple, designed purely for survival and a quick energy burst. The German soldier was expected to live off the land, to utilize captured stores, and to rely on what was called the rolling kitchen, a mobile field kitchen that was often the first casualty of an Allied air raid. Their supply lines were perpetually strained, relying first on their own limited trucks, then on captured French and Soviet vehicles, and most disastrously on horses. By 1941, the German army was operating the most modern war machine in history, with over 2.5 million horses. Think about that. The logistics of the German army, the one that shocked the world with its blitzkrieg, required a constant supply chain not just for fuel and ammunition but for hay and oats. Their operational range was always constrained by the speed of a wagon, the health of a draft animal, and the perpetually empty pantry of the occupied territory they had just passed through. Contrast this with the American philosophy. The American war machine was built on a single radical premise. If a soldier needs it, he gets it, no matter the cost or the distance. The American logistical doctrine was not about efficiency, it was about redundancy, throughput, and overwhelming excess. Suspense Segment 1. The Birth of the Beast, Quartermaster Corps. The secret to that 22 million pounds of canned meat a day wasn't in the can itself. It was in the system that filled, moved, and delivered it. This story begins not on the battlefield but in the most mundane, bureaucratic branch of the U.S. Army, the Quartermaster Corps. When the U.S. entered the war, the Quartermaster Corps faced an unprecedented challenge. They weren't just supplying a standard army, they were about to supply a globe-spanning army fighting in 5 radically different climates, from the steaming jungles of New Guinea to the frozen hell of the Ardennes, all while fighting a two-front war against the most disciplined armies on Earth. Their solution was a revolution in food science, the standardization and mass production of the C ration and the K ration. The German K ration was a meal of survival, the American C ration was a meal of morale. Inside the American C ration box was a staggering array of components. A meat component, Spam or beef stew, a vegetable component, crackers, a soluble beverage, coffee or cocoa, sugar, gum, cigarettes, and crucially toilet paper. The German soldier had a bread ration and a meat paste. The American soldier had a complete, calorically optimized, psychologically satisfying meal that also contained a luxury good, a stimulant, and a hygiene product. But the sheer quantity required boggled the mind. To maintain a constant flow of rations, the American industrial machine had to achieve truly miraculous output. Imagine the scale. The Quartermaster Corps had to process enough meat, enough coffee, enough tobacco, and enough canning material to ensure that every single GI, every single day, had the guaranteed caloric intake necessary not just to survive, but to fight at peak effectiveness. This leads to our first truly astonishing logistical fact. a statistic that stunned post-war German generals. The US had to produce roughly 13 pounds of supplies per man per day just to keep the war going. 13 pounds. That's ammunition, fuel, bandages, spare parts, and food. Now, the German soldier was lucky to get 1 pound of external supplies per day. The tenfold difference in daily consumption was not an accident. It was a deliberate, industrial strategy designed to grind the enemy to dust under a mountain of material. The major surprise one, the global cannery and the tin plate. Where did all that canned meat come from? It wasn't just pulled from a few large farms. This required a re-engineering of the global economy. The most critical component of the American sea ration wasn't the meat. It was the tin plate used to make the can. Prior to the war, tin was a precious commodity, imported largely from Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, territories that quickly fell to the Japanese. This created an immediate existential crisis for the Quartermaster Corps. No tin, no cans. No cans, no preserved rations. No preserved rations, no ability to fight a global war. The American answer was typically audacious: find a substitute and industrialize it at warp speed. The U.S. government immediately invested hundreds of millions of dollars into developing the electrolytic tin plating process. Instead of dipping the steel sheet into a vat of molten tin, which wasted precious material, the new method electrochemically bonded a microscopically thin layer of tin onto the steel. The result? The process cut the amount of tin needed per can by over 60%. Now, combine this material innovation with the speed of American canneries. Factories that had once processed peaches and corn were retooled overnight to process meats like pork and beans, and chopped ham and eggs. In the peak year of 1944, American industry was producing over 65 million cans per day for military consumption alone. That volume did not just supply the U.S. Army. This surplus was so immense that it flowed to the British, the Soviets, and dozens of allied nations through the Lend-Lease program. The German soldier, huddled in his foxhole, was starving because his generals lacked the fuel for his trucks. He was also starving because the American industrial machine had learned how to use an invisible, microscopic layer of metal to mass-produce food containers at a rate that the world had never conceived of. And here is the psychological bombshell, the detail that would haunt the Wehrmacht for decades. When German POWs first arrived in American prison camps, they were served a meal of fresh, hot food. For many, it was the first fresh meat and milk they had seen in years. But the ultimate shock wasn't the food, it was the trash. They watched as American cooks simply threw away the empty cans. To the Germans, cans, especially durable metal ones, were valuable scrap. They were taught to save everything. The American act of casually discarding hundreds of thousands of pounds of high-quality steel and tin scrap was not seen as inefficiency. It was seen as proof of a material empire so limitless, so terrifying, that their war had been lost before it even began. The German soldier was fighting for survival. The American soldier was fighting for the right to waste. And that waste was the ultimate sign of power.